Good afternoon, and sorry for the delay, uh, and hope that you can see it. For those of you on Zoom, as well as all of us here at the Traverse Area District Library. My name is Stephen Siciliano. I'm the president of the Traverse Area Historical Society. And since we do have some visitors today, I'd like to just share with you that the Traverse Area Historical Society is a nonprofit 501c3. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and present the history of the Grand Traverse region. Activities include programs, historical tours, archive support, scholarship support, and support of local initiatives to support local history. We are all volunteer organization, and the revenues we collect from membership and from donations go right into programs like the one today. Today's program is going to give us a great story about the life and times of our 22nd governor of the state of Michigan, Edwin Winans. And the speaker is Valerie Winans, who has written the first and therefore most definitive biography on the governor's life. What she particularly does is not only tell the story of an important figure in our history, but also the life and times of the governor from his early life through his service to our state as a legislator and as our governor. And if you are interested in purchasing their biography, there are some in the back. And so I would like to welcome Valerie Winans, the author of Edwin Winans. Please.
Thank you, folks, very much. So the life of Edwin B. Winans, the 22nd governor of the state of Michigan, was indeed extraordinary. Let me see if this works. Oh, let me see if this works. Okay. This is a walking stick, once owned by Edwin Winans, and it was passed down through the generations to my husband, David Winans. David is the governor's nephew, several generations removed. And the whole story of reincarnating Edwin started with that stick. It truly is a treasure. 130 years or so of time tends to dilute the memory of even a very great man. But his walking stick was a tangible legacy, and it made me wonder, who was a guy that would own such a stick? Edwin grew up near his farm in Hamburg, Michigan. I joined the Hamburg Historical Society in search of information about him. The museum shared some documents with me and some local stories about what the town was like when he lived there. They did an expo at their township hall on the governor, and my husband and I attended. We were so excited. We thought, oh, we'll go to Hamburg and maybe we'll meet other Winans descendants there. Turns out we were the first Winans any of them had ever met. We were an oddity to them. It's kind of like Bigfoot. But as part of that time, we spent time going to his farm, where his farm had been, where the house had been, overlooking the lake. We visited his gravesite and historical marker. He moved to Unadilla, Michigan when he was 8 years old. He was born in New York, Avon, New York, and he moved to Michigan when he was 8 years old. And he lived in Unadilla with his parents, but he went to Hamburg and stayed with his sister Nancy in order to go to school. His father died in 1842, and so he went to work at Seth Petty's mill. He carded wool. I don't know if any of you know about carding wool. He carded wool for a living at Seth Petty's mill in order to support himself and his mother. But he managed to go to Albion College and graduated from Albion College. He wanted to go to the University of Michigan Law School, but instead he decided to walk west. The story of his trip west in search of gold was a big part of Edwin's life. But the only facts I had were few and far between. I knew that he walked west with 2 friends, 4 horses, and a wagon load of supplies. But Edwin did not leave a journal or even a letter about what his experience was on that walk west. I would have to tell that story about the overland trail through others that made that trip. So I read countless books and newspaper and magazine articles about it. Other Argonauts did leave a record, what it was like to cross the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains and the deserts and the treacherous Sierra Nevadas. Many along that route died from accidents or cholera. There were so many rattlesnakes, some kept count and reached 10 or 12 a day. Many horses were bitten and some people. They thought there might be a danger from Indians. And although there were a few incidents, mostly they were left alone at that time. The Indian Wars came later. To emphasize the danger of that walk across the country, of the 3 men who left Michigan in March of 1850, Edwin is the only one that lived long enough to get to the gold. One friend died along the way, probably from cholera. The other one as soon as they reached Placerville, California in July of 1850. By the time they reached Placerville, the wagon had been left behind, the horses abandoned, and Edwin's friend was leaning on him for support. After the last partner died, there was no time to grieve. Edwin had to bury his partner and get to work. As he searched for gold, some 3,000 miles away from home and all alone, Edwin must have thought hard and long about all that had been sacrificed to get there. Edwin began mining placer gold with a shovel, a pickaxe, and a gold pan. And he must have either been very lucky or very good at it, because soon he had invested in the Randolph mine and in the Rough and Ready Ditch Company, and they both turned out to be very successful companies. He lived in Rough and Ready, California from 1850 to 1858. It was called Rough and Ready because it was a town founded by some ex-soldiers of Zachary Taylor's. They called Zachary Taylor Old Rough and Ready. And there was vigilante law in the early days. It was pretty much rough and ready, that's for sure. The people of Rough and Ready got very dissatisfied with the lack of law and taxes, and so they seceded and made their own country. And it was called the Great Republic of Rough and Ready. You may not have heard of it because it only lasted 3 months. They found that they thought about, my goodness, July 4th is coming up and we're not going to be able to celebrate. We have no July 4th. And they had a big celebration every year. Well, it just wasn't worth it. So they voted to rejoin the Union. Now, a man named Asa Phippen was a well-known character in Rough and Ready. And Asa told a story about the local preacher, Reverend Dunleavy. The Reverend had just completed prayers over a fresh grave, and when he looked up, All the mourners were out staking claims. They had found nuggets in the newly dug earth. Places where gold was found without any water meant miners had to find a water source to separate the gold from the dirt. Companies were formed to bring water to the miners in ditches and flumes coming down the mountain. Edwin, as a part of the Rough and Ready Ditch Company, was patrolling the ditch when he caught a miner stealing water, and it resulted in a fist fight. Now, the guy wasn't a fair fighter. He's kind of a dirty fighter, and he bit Edwin's finger so hard that he ended up with a mangled finger for the rest of his life. But the thief left without the water. Now, Edwin was involved in several other successful pursuits and eventually became the town banker. He was a pretty big deal right there in Rough and Ready. The walking stick he owned was tangible evidence of his success. The walking stick is made of California redwood and topped with gold-veined quartz that was mined in nearby Rough and Ready. And so obviously that's where the stick originated. Now he was a wealthy man now, and so he must have thought a lot about Sarah Galloway, the girl he left behind. He must have thought about that a lot before he decided to travel across the continent to ask for her hand in marriage. He returned to Michigan through the Isthmus of Panama. Now, choices for travel in the 19th century were limited. It was much shorter to go from California, the coastline of California, to the coastline, the eastern coastline through Panama. And Edwin could afford it now. So the other thing is that the trip itself was much improved from when it was in 1850s when he walked across the continent, because in 1855, they had a railroad across the isthmus. So he hurried back home. He hurried to the Galloway farm to ask Sarah to marry him. And she said, no. She did not want to marry him, but she would be glad to be his sister. So why doesn't he ask her sister Liv to marry him? So he did. And Elizabeth said yes. And in September of 1855, they were married and quickly on their way to California. In 1858, the mining of gold near Rough and Ready was beginning to slow down. And the couple decided it was time to return to Michigan. They made the return trip with their son, George, who was born in Rough and Ready in 1856. So Edwin and Elizabeth and George would have traveled from Rough and Ready by buggy to Sacramento. They would get on a boat in Sacramento and travel the Sacramento River to San Francisco. In San Francisco, they would get on a steamer that would take them from California to Panama. They'd get on the train in Panama and take it across from Panama City to Aspinwall on the Atlantic side, where they'd get on another steamer, steam north to New York City, and then probably train and buggy back to Michigan. Now, the only way to get their gold from California to Michigan was to carry it with them. And they were afraid of bandits. So Elizabeth sewed gold into a dress, but then it was too heavy to wear. So they carried their gold in satchels, and Edwin protected it with a gun on his hip. The Winans family returned to Hamburg, Michigan, and moved in with Elizabeth's family. And Edwin was very soon enticed to go back west. Some friends of his had a business proposition in Idaho, and they wanted him to go along because he had experience on the overland trail. And so he went with them, and on the way back, they were in a stagecoach. They took a stagecoach back to Michigan. And Edwin carried a shotgun in case they ran into bandits or Indians or whatever. And he made the statement when he loaded the gun that the man that gets this will get, it was just a blank, so I don't know, must have been a bad word. And they didn't run into Indians and they didn't run into bandits, but they did run into a bump. And the stagecoach tipped over and he shot himself in the shoulder. Yeah, he was gravely wounded. They had to carry him to Salt Lake City, where he spent several weeks recovering. So he gets back home, and in 1866, he bought the Galloway farm from Elizabeth's brother, Stephen. And Edwin farmed those 400 acres the rest of his life. The day before he died, he was out supervising boys putting Paris green on the potato plants. He was a farmer by heart and by vocation. Newspapers became a rich source after Edwin had been in the public for a while. And so one story told that Edwin was a muscular, broad-chested man who took pride in his strength. When he saw two neighbors struggling to move a big boulder, he said, "Move over, I'll do this for you." And he did do it for them, but he strained so hard, he damaged his eye so badly, they had to remove it. And after that, he had a glass eye. So this is our guy. He's got a mangled finger. He's got a bum shoulder and a glass eye. During the Civil War, he served in the Michigan legislature. This is a second Capitol building where he served in the legislature. The first Capitol building, of course, was in Detroit. And the second one was certainly in Lansing. And they outgrew it right away. He was against the war. He was against the Civil War. He was pro-union, but he was anti-war. He thought they could have negotiated a solution. He just did not like the war. He disagreed with the suspension of habeas corpus, and he called Abraham Lincoln a tyrant. He disputed the legality of the Emancipation Proclamation. It only applied to enslaved people in the South and not to those in border states that were loyal to the Union. And he was labeled as a Southern sympathizer, but he was pro-Union. He was for the Union. Now, Cousin Ross was an entirely different situation. Cousin Ross was a wealthy resident of Baltimore, Maryland, and a Maryland legislature at the same time. And he was jailed twice for being a Southern sympathizer, but he said outrageous things and he just got himself in a lot of trouble. He was an inventor. He invented some pretty wild things, the camelback locomotive and the cigar ship. The cigar ship, the propulsion for the cigar ship was in the middle of the ship. Very strange. Didn't go very far, obviously. And he was also credited with inventing this steam gun, but he didn't. It was invented by somebody else, but it was found in his machine shop, and so they called it the Winans machine gun. But just to antagonize, Ross had a huge mansion on top of a hill in Baltimore, and just to antagonize the troops, he put things that looked like cannon pointing down the hill right at where the Union soldiers mustered. I mean, the guy was looking for trouble, right? The cigar ship was kind of well known, I guess, because Major General Wool sent this letter to Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War during the Civil War, and he suggested that Ross's cigar ship would be useful in battles against the Merrimack. Well, we know the Merrimack had devastated a lot of Union ships. But as far as we know, the cigar ship was in Baltimore Harbor, but I don't know that it ever left the harbor. Now, the next part of his saga was that he became elected probate judge of Livingston County, beginning in 1876. The work didn't suit him, and he only did it one term, but he said he did it to get a name for himself. And I think it worked for him pretty well, because even after he was elected governor, many people just called him judge. He was then elected to serve in the 48th and again in the 49th Congresses of the United States. Now, Edwin was a Democrat. He was a Democrat in politics in California, in the Michigan legislature. He was a Democrat in the Michigan Constitutional Convention. He was a Democrat as Hamburg Township supervisor and as a probate judge. At the Michigan Democratic Convention of 1882, there were several people that declined the nomination for US Congress. When Edwin's name was called, he tried to stand up to say, "I decline," and the man behind him grabbed his jacket and shoved him back down in his seat and held him there, and he was quickly chosen by acclamation. He was reluctant to be nominated, but he ran with vigor. He went to the Harlan Mills to ask the mill workers to vote for him, and they were just going to lunch. So he sat down and chatted with them during their lunch. And then he learned that the Republican candidate was upstairs in a private room. And he thought, well, la-di-da. So he went right up there, introduced himself, and asked for their vote. Now, this may have won him the election because he won by only 32 votes. Now, this, you're probably going to all go to sleep at this one, but I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. I found the congressional directory for the 48th Congress, and I don't have a pointer, but on the eastern side of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., Edwin Winans was in seat 84 right over there. Isn't that cool? And the other thing I learned from the congressional directory was that he lived at 52 B Street Northeast in the White House neighborhood. So I just thought that was cool. Little things make me happy. He was there when the Washington Monument was finished, which was really a pretty big deal. You know, construction had started in 1848 and then was stopped during the Civil War. And so when it was finally completed in 1884, it was a big deal. There was all kinds of parades and parties and carrying on. And so he was there for that. In 1890, the Democratic Party in Michigan was looking for a suitable candidate to run for governor. Now, the Republican candidate, a Mr. Turner, had been accused of unethical behavior. James Turner could also be accused of poor judgment because when a group of Methodist leaders asked him why he was renting houses to prostitutes, he said, "I'm not going to kick them out. They pay their rent." Well, you know how that went over. Not well. And so the Democrats wanted a squeaky clean candidate. They wanted someone with unquestionable ethics, and they chose our guy, Edwin B. He was elected the 22nd governor of the state of Michigan. He served one term, 1891 and 1892. They were two-year terms at the time. And his main legislative accomplishments was an election law. He was hot on having privacy in voting. There had been some election laws recently passed, but he was for privacy in voting. So when you go in to vote and they put your ballot in a sleeve and hand it to you, and you go to the little area where you have a little cardboard thing to put your ballot, that's our guy, that's Edwin, that's the law that he signed, among other things and good things that were in that law. The other good law was called the minor law. Now, they passed it and actually went to the Supreme Court, and it was found constitutional, but the next group of people that came in voted it out. So it was only a law for a while. But what it made legal was electors for a presidential election would be chosen by districts, like we choose senators and representatives. So out of 14 electors for the state of Michigan, maybe 4 districts would be in the UP and 10 would be in the Lower Peninsula. Edwin just felt that that would better represent really the will of the people. You know, I think Maine today does that. So there might be, 4 votes for one candidate and 10 for another. One of the things he was very interested in was cutting spending. Now that's current, isn't it? It's a big, he vetoed a $30,000 appropriation bill for the Grand Army of the Republic because he was against using public money for private purposes. He said that the Grand Army had no more right to the money than a political convention or the General Assembly of Presbyterians. He vetoed it. It was returned to the legislature requiring a 2/3 vote, and they had the votes. They were all set to override it and make it law. One of the legislatures got up and started to verbally attack the governor personally. And another legislature then rose and defended the governor and said, look, the governor did what he believed to be right, and you've got no reason to attack him personally. And that he had the highest esteem for the governor, and they should vote on that bill right now. And so they did. And the bill, which was good as passed, was lost. And when the governor heard about the loyalty of the legislature, he had tears in his eyes. So that is kind of a rare thing that would happen. Now, Edwin was well, I guess I skipped right along. Edwin was instrumental in the planning and organization for the Chicago World's Fair. The World's Fair was in 1893, of course, but he was in 1891 and 1892, was heavy into the planning of what it would be like. And this is the Michigan House. And so he had a lot of influence in that, and it was a beauty. And so good job there, Ed. There are a few pictures of the governor. In the 19th century, most people didn't even have a camera. And so they weren't snapping pictures. They weren't sending around pictures of what they ate at the restaurant, trust me. Their pictures were posed, and they had some reason that they needed to take a picture. So this happens to be a picture of the governor right in the middle, and he's with the Michigan National Guard. At the Capitol of Michigan, there's a painting of the governor right outside the Senate chamber. And it's part of the Capitol tours. And I had talked to the Capitol historian to share with her that we had this walking stick, and she took us on a tour. And interestingly, the painting at the Capitol does not show a mangled finger. Howard Hovey, someone that lived with the Winans for a while, was very close to them, said, the finger was on the right hand and it looked like it had been caught in machinery. Well, there's the picture of the governor and there's his right hand, and the hand looks fine. So it was either his left hand and Howard Hovey was wrong, or if it's right hand and the artist just decided to paint it beautifully, not mangled. Another little bit of trivia. After Edwin became governor, there were many resources, lots of things. I spent a lot of time at this building right here. The archives were there. I went through boxes and boxes of old correspondence. It's difficult. There is an index, but it's pretty much a blind grab a box by the date. Spent a lot of time in the archives of Michigan. The other thing is that the Lansing newspaper, during the time he was governor, was a paper called the State Republican, and the only access to that is at the State of Michigan Library on microfilm. I don't know if you've ever read newspapers on microfilm, but if you have, you deserve a badge. These page by page, you just are searching quickly through to grab a name or something. We did find some great stuff, but I know we missed a lot of stuff as well. But towards the end of the research on the book, this is another little research story for you. My daughter and I thought about, he's probate judge in Howell. Well, let's just go to Howell and we'll take some pictures of the courthouse there. A nice thing for the book. So we drive to Howell. Sure enough, there's the courthouse. We're snapping pictures and walking around. We come to a corner and it says 1890. Well, he was a probate judge in 1876. There's something wrong here. So we go inside and sure enough, the first courthouse had burned down, couldn't get a picture. But she said, why don't you go down the street to our library? So we went just down the street a ways, and there was a wonderful little Carnegie library that they had did a beautiful job on expanding. They were delightful there, and we found almost everything that we learned about Liz Winans. So that was a bonus. See, sometimes you just fall in it and you still come out with something. The research is the most fun for me. I hope you can hear me because I'm in and out of this microphone, I'm sorry. The research is the most fun for me. And I love those little, as you can tell, those little tidbits of information. For example, when Edwin was elected governor, the state librarian was a Mrs. J.E. Tenney, and she had served in that role for 22 years. Look what I'm doing. Okay, doesn't matter. She had served in that role for 22 years and was well thought of. She was replaced when Edwin came into office by the spoils system. We all remember that. And Margaret Custer Calhoun was made librarian in her place. She was a sister of General George A. Custer. And another replaced worker was Susan K. Winans, who was the widow of Edwin's cousin, George Albertus Winans. The state Republican reported, S.K. Winans, a Republican clerk of the State Department, stepped out today to make room for reformers. But the extra interesting part is that the Winans and the Tenneys surely got together and talked about this, because the 1880 census revealed that Susan Winans and the Tenneys lived in the same boarding house. Wouldn't want to send a governor in there for lunch. So here's Elizabeth. She was such a cool gal. Anybody that knew her just thought a lot about her. And I often thought, she clearly knew that she was Edwin's second choice. She marched with him across the country, lived with him in a rough and ready town, had a baby there, came home, and supported him in every way. She managed the farm, she harvested the goods, she wouldn't let anybody touch a tree on that property. You had to have her permission if you're going to cut down a tree. She was some kind of a gal, and I just have a lot of respect for Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth and Ed had two sons. George Galloway was the eldest son. He was born in Rough and Ready, California. He was a member of the Michigan militia. He helped at the farm most of his life and also worked other jobs. He was in business with his father in a store in Howell that burned to the ground in 1892. He worked in the administration as a private and military secretary to the governor. I don't have a picture of George Galloway. This is Edwin B. Winans, and he was born at the farm in 1869. He attended Oakwood Academy, where he played the triangle. He entered West Point at 18 and graduated in 1891. He was superintendent of the military academy at West Point for a period of time. He had a distinguished military career and was in command of the infantry in France in World War I and retired in 1933 as commander of the 10th Cavalry. Whatever happened to Sarah? Are you thinking about that? Well, she moved to Oklahoma with her husband and 2 girls. One daughter was named Susan, and the other daughter was named Edwina. Susan, the daughter, was interviewed in 1937 by the Indian Pioneer History Project for Oklahoma. She said, "The first year of our life in Oklahoma was quite hard. We did not have too much to eat. That year, my uncle, who lived in Michigan, sent us quite a lot of canned fruits and vegetables and a barrel of apples." From the Fort Worth Daily Gazette, June 21st, 1891, Sarah Galloway's husband, whom she married in preference to Winans, died and left her an invalid with 2 children. She has ever since made her home in the hospitable mansion of Governor Winans, to whom she promised long ago to be a sister. Edwin Winans died on July 4th, 1894. From Hamburg, Michigan, July 5th, 1894. This village is mourning the death of ex-Governor Winans. The news was just shock to every person for miles around, as the governor's general disposition has endeared him to all. While the funeral tomorrow will be private, nearly everyone here will attend. Now, doesn't that tell you a story? Although the funeral will be private, nearly everybody in town will attend. Wow. I also want to share with you that the walking stick was donated to the Capitol building on January 2nd, 2025. The Capitol historian and her assistant came to this very room, and we had a little celebration, and they took the walking stick back with them to the Capitol. I got a letter from them a few weeks ago saying that they will be using pictures of the stick in their book that they are publishing for the 150th anniversary of the Capitol building. And they will be using it in a presentation or a thing that they're doing at the History Center there. And more than 100,000 school children will see the stick and hear Edwin's story in the 2026-2027 school year. And the rest of the story. So the stick is what prompted me to do the research. The stick is what prompted me to write the book. And the stick is the rest of the story. Thank you. Any questions? Not really local, but it belongs to everybody. Right? Yes.
How much traveling did you do? I think you mentioned you went to Oklahoma. Did you actually go out to California too?
No, I did not. I didn't go to Oklahoma. I didn't go to California, but I wanted to.
Oh, okay.
There was found a museum there, but it was a privately owned museum. And they had records of a lawsuit that was filed, E.B. Winans et al., having to do with the water, with the Rough and Ready Ditch Company water. And I asked for a copy and she said, no, it was too delicate. And I said, well, maybe somebody could just take pictures of it, like with a selfie or something. Anyway, she sent me like a top page, but she would not send it to me and she would not listen to, because I think I would have driven right out there. But it was a privately owned museum and there was not, I talked to another museum and the lady said, well, there must be another copy. If they've got a copy, somebody else has got a copy. Well, nobody else has got a copy. And it's just kind of sad. So yeah, the research was great. I spent a lot of time in Lansing. And of course, Howell. Hamburg is only about 17 miles from Howell. And so I initially went to, of course, Hamburg because that's where his farm was.
Are any of their homes still built, you know, or did they burn down or?
The mansion burned down in 1924. And actually, Elizabeth was still living there. And that they had a chimney fire and her son George was there and they got out and everything, but they thought they had put, I mean, how many times this happens to people? They thought they had put the chimney fire out and they went back in, went to bed or whatever. And when they woke up, the place was filled with smoke and they were just lucky to get out. So they not only, they lost most of the furnishings and everything else that they had. I did a presentation for the Hamburg Historical Society. They did a gala fundraiser at the country club there. And the country club there used to be the farm. And a lot of the people there, most of the people there were from the area. A lot of them lived around Winans Lake, they said. And I was surprised when I mentioned this is where the farm was. We are sitting where the farm was. They were clueless. They did not know that. So that was fun. Thanks, guys. Great time. I have some books in the back if anybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. This is wonderful. There are some refreshments in the back. Please socialize and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. So thank you very much.
Stephen says Edwin is a stand-up guy.